Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Coming up on the show today, Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com runs down the major markets where their upward trend looks like it will continue for the next month or two. On the precious metals front, the gold miners were the big winners for the week. Bitcoin also had a big boost upwards. Author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash, Hilliard MacBeth, takes a look at the sad state of Canada's real estate. He believes it could be quite some time before the market bottoms out in the major cities. The founder of ActionForCanada.com, Tanya Gaw, talks to us about how important it is for you to know your rights when it comes to banking. She says you don't have to let the mega money holders push you around. She has concerns about offshore call center security and also about the government allowing banks to dip into your account if they run into financial difficulties. Now, let's get into the show. My guest is Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com, where you'll find insightful market commentary and timely technical analysis. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Welcome back to This Week in Money.
Good to be with you, Jim.
What happened on the stock markets this week?
10 days ago, we saw a reading in the VIX, the volatility index, get down and give us a sequential 9 signal, first time since January. And the characteristic there is that we would see a near-term correction in the stock market, be looking for a test of the 20-day moving averages. And, what you were looking at was the S&P and the Russell 2000 sitting at all-time highs at the time the signal came in. We had a good correction this week. We got down so that the S&P, the NASDAQ, and the Russell all kissed their 20-day averages on Thursday. A small uptick on Friday, but it looks as though the correction that was called for from VIX is now probably behind us. And the money supply numbers that we look at, the global M2, still suggest that we have an upward bias into September, October. So, that's what I'll be looking at. And, certain sectors were deeply oversold. 3 weeks ago, they bounced back well, and you're seeing, good leadership starting to happen now in other areas.
What's happening with crude oil?
This is the one that's just slowly working its way back up to resistance. We're at 86.80 as of tonight. As we know, the top end had been over 100. Correction was down to 66, and then a small, quick recover up to 90. So we're at 86. We're getting back and testing that midterm high, and I would think that we want to be looking at that as a resistance level to speak of, and from looking at then the various stocks, the XEG being the TSE Energy Index is sitting at a new high for the year. Exceptionally good move there. And over on the U.S. side, you got the same thing with the XLE up at 63. This was down at 53. Just 5 weeks ago. So just an exceptionally good move, and that's without any real leadership as far as the oil market is concerned. So, it's a market of stocks, and you've got to be looking for the sectors that are doing well.
What's happening with gold and silver?
Very, very happy with this. So back on July the 20th, we sent out a note to subscribers that the sequential 13 signal that we were getting in gold was important. We'd only had half a dozen since 2000, and we were going to be looking for a multi-week rally on the upside. As of today, the 20th of August, we've now had just an exceptionally good move. The gold price itself is up about 15%. The silver is up about 26%. However, the miners have really been leading on the upside. Take a look at the GDXJ, as far as the golds are concerned, 44% move in this window since the 20th of July. The silver stocks up about 38%. And some of the items that we, really like a Wheaton precious metal all-time high as it finishes off this week. So there's just, a real kickoff to what should be a much larger move over time. But at this point, the multi-week rally is probably due for some kind of a pause before it gains some more steam on the upside. But this is a sector that we were cautious of it back in January, early February, got the big correction that we wanted, and had the opportunity to step back in at some very attractive levels.
What's happening with copper?
Copper is just, we've been saying that this is all along a strong metal, holding well. We're at 658 as of the end of this week, and it's still got its upside bias. Had a small correction down to 637 during the week. Got some short-term signals that imply that it's ready to start its next leg to the upside. So I don't see any reason to think otherwise. And take a look at stocks like Freeport McMoran, FCX. That is sitting at all-time highs. It just exploded this week from 67 up to 76. So we're definitely seeing good leadership in the miners.
What's going on with the U.S. and Canadian dollars?
U.S. dollar, we got that big sell signal here back in June when it was up around 101.5. Got a retest of the high in July, went back to 101. And since then, it's just been grinding its way down. As of now, still don't see any basing indications in here on the daily charts. The weekly, if anything, is down below its 50-week and 20-week moving averages. So the upside bias that it had from the early part of the year is pretty much behind us. We'll have to give it the opportunity to reform its pattern in here.
What's going on with Bitcoin?
Just explosive move there. We had talked about it last week, is stuck inside a trading range. The bottom end was at 62,000, the top end at 66. Well, it popped through the top end of that range midweek and closed off the week at 77,000. That's just a monstrous move here. And volume expanded dramatically starting on Wednesday, continued right through on Friday. On the weekly charts, we are now all the way back in very quick succession to the 50-week moving average, and also approaching the highs that we saw back in May. So wouldn't be at all surprised that after this kind of a run, that it takes a little bit of time here. And, we'll keep a pretty close eye on this one.
Ross, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Coming up, Hilliard MacBeth next on This Week in Money. Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. This Week in Money is archived on YouTube at Talk Digital Network. Welcome back. My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the second edition of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's speaking to us from Edmonton. His website, MacBeth.McLeodPartners.com. He's Well, just fresh off the golf course, so I'm sure you've got lots of tales to tell us. And can you tell us about the latest edition of your book, When the Bubble Bursts, and where people can purchase it?
So it's available at all the top bookstores. Now in Canada, of course, Chapters and Indigo merged, and now they control about 80 or 90% of the major bookstores. So, but the independent bookstores can order it for you, or else, of course, you could buy it on the Monopoly Amazon online and in ebook. A lot of people are buying an ebook, and the subtitle is Surviving, and we're in that mode now. We're in the survival mode of the Canadian real estate bubble bursting. And there's, contrary to what some people are saying, there's still a lot more time to go, probably 2 or 3 years at least. So lots of good information there for everybody.
What are you hearing on the U.S.-Canada trade agreement?
So we're talking on Friday, and I was playing golf for 4 hours, so I didn't check my news. But prior to that, they were still looking like they were getting close to a deal. But I think part of the problem is that a few days ago, Prime Minister Carney said that a no deal is better than a bad deal, and so we're going to find out probably pretty soon whether it's a bad deal or not. And would Canada walk away from a bad deal? Well, my opinion, for what it's worth, it isn't worth anything. But in this case, I don't know if it wouldn't be a bad idea to walk away if it's a bad deal, because we did have a deal. We had the U.S., Canada, Mexico free trade agreement, and the U.S. is in violation of the terms of that agreement. So if we signed a new agreement with them, what's to say that they wouldn't violate that agreement too? So it seems like giving up key concessions in an agreement might not be a good idea if they're just going to ignore the other parts of the agreement like they have with CUSMA.
Is the real estate correction escalating into a crash, especially in BC and Ontario?
Yeah, it sure looks like it. Hamilton, Toronto, Vancouver seem to be well over 20% and in decline from the peak, and they're still going down substantially. We have a chart that we put out around the middle of the month. It shows house prices in the major centers, the average house price for Canada, the amount of the household debt, and the rate of increased household debt, and then the after-tax wages and inflation. And the house prices are still way up there, and they've come down a lot. Like you can see, the peak was in 2022, and now we're 4 years past the peak, but soon to be 5 years, I guess. And but 20% is just not enough of a correction to correct the disparity between what people can really afford and what the house price is. And the gap for a long time was bridged by lending people more money than they should be borrowing. And, that they've stopped doing that, I think, mostly. The banks are tightening up. And so the house prices, once the banks start to tighten up, the house prices start to come down, because if you can't get a mortgage, you can't buy the house, except for a few people, not even the top 1%, are what the only people that can buy for cash. And the rest of us all have to get a mortgage. So smaller mortgages, smaller house prices, and you could see the prices come down another 20% from here.
How long could it take to hit bottom, and how will we know when we've reached the bottom?
Well, almost every day now I get asked, is this the bottom? And I read on social media about some people calling the bottom and other people saying, no, it's not the bottom yet. And but my feeling is that it won't be the bottom until you see a recession, first of all, because the housing market and all the associated financial sector, all the different related, the realtors, all of those people are hurting badly right now except for the banks, because of the decline in the activity in the housing market and also the lower prices. So that should drag us into a recession eventually in some way or another. And once we enter a recession, once it's officially acknowledged, some people say we've been in a recession for 4 years, and I tend to sympathize with that argument. But technically, there haven't been any really bad quarters of GDP contraction, which is what you need for a recession. So once we get to that point, then we can start saying, okay, now let's start watching for a bottom. But until we actually see a recession, then I wouldn't get too excited about, calling it a bottom yet. and the other thing I'm watching, and that monthly chart I just mentioned, we'll be able to see on that chart when people are back into the affordability range. Almost all the housing markets in Canada are rated as severely unaffordable or very unaffordable. One of the few that's rated as moderately unaffordable by Demographia, puts out a report every year, is Edmonton. And Edmonton is only moderately unaffordable. But that's not because house prices aren't high in Edmonton. It's because incomes are so high in Edmonton. So incomes in Calgary and Edmonton are quite high because there's a lot of two-income families. And of course, the wages are higher in Alberta because of the oil industry. So, but it's still not in the 3 to 4 times range. It's still 5, 6 times. And of course, Vancouver is 14 and Toronto is up there as well. So those are crazy. Only Sydney, Australia has consistently been higher. And Hong Kong, I guess, have been consistently higher than Vancouver and Toronto. So Vancouver and Toronto have always been in the top 5 unaffordable. And, we've got a lot of work to do before we get even close to moderately unaffordable. I don't know if we'll ever get to affordable. In the big centers, we might never get there, but we might get to moderately unaffordable.
What's happening with high-end Vancouver homes?
Well, there was a report out about a week ago, I noticed, and they listed all the homes that were for sale, and it started at $7.5 million plus. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I added up all the ones that are like above 7 million and 106 homes, but they were just looking at the city of Vancouver. Now, that does not include West Van, which is, British properties, which is where there's a lot of very expensive properties up on the hill there overlooking the ocean. And they've been bought for a couple of decades now by very wealthy people laundering money, who knows, a lot of people from China. And, so if you included all the homes in that, there's probably at least a couple of hundred homes for sale in the 5 or 10 million range. And, that's pretty scary when you think about it. One of the things that happened just in the last, 10 days is that might affect Vancouver, high-end Vancouver, is, China has cracked down on, ownership of assets outside of China. So the rule has been for a long time, and obviously people were breaking the rule, that you can only take out $50,000 per year out of China to invest overseas. Well, now the Chinese government is reminding all the people that pay taxes in China that they have to report all of their worldwide assets, and the government would like to see a list of all those. So I think that that probably scared quite a few people, and they might consider selling their properties. But the other thing that they did was, and I think, Jimmy, you and I talked about China Evergrande going back 3 or 4 years when it got into trouble. It went bankrupt. At one time, the head of China Evergrande, it was a big real estate development firm, was the wealthiest man in China, wealthiest person in China. And he just got sentenced to life in prison for fraud. He took the deposits from the people that wanted to buy houses and used it for other means. So at one time, China Evergrande was in the electric car business. They were in about 20 other non-real estate related businesses. And of course, that money to do that came from these deposits. A really strange thing in China is when you buy a pre-construction apartment, which a lot of people were doing as an investment, you have to put all the money up, not just a deposit, but all the money. And of course, I guess China Evergrande was taking some of that money, using it for other purposes when they should have been saving it to build. So now that in the last 3 years, they've been obviously unable to build these properties. They didn't have enough money, and these people are out a lot of money. So they put the guy in jail for life. Now, whether he actually stays in there for life, who knows? But they're making it so that those two things, the email saying you have to report your assets and putting this very, very high-profile businessman in jail for life, has got to send chills through the people that have been speculating in West Van, and so that's going to have an impact probably all across Canada. It isn't just West Van; it's Calgary, Toronto, even Edmonton probably has some of that. So we'll see an impact there. That's only at the very high end. At the moderate, low end, it's all about bank financing and what can you qualify for in a mortgage. That's the number one thing.
Yes, and when Huai Ka-yan gets out of prison, if he ever does, he won't have anything. The courts have ordered all of his personal assets to be seized and fined the company and its affiliates $2.3 billion.
Yeah, well, we do that in North America, but we do the fine and the company pays the fine, the $2.3 billion. I mean, how many times I saw a report once, and I don't even remember the number. It's just incredible how many billions of dollars JP Morgan Chase has paid for breaking the rules, bending the rules, deliberately flaunting the rules over the years, over the last 2 or 3 decades. But nobody ever went to jail, not even for a month, never mind for life, right? So it never stops them because obviously the company's paying the fine, not the executives don't pay the fine. So we don't do it quite the same way in North America. The company gets to keep going, the CEO gets to keep his job, and there's no jail time.
Well, didn't the woman in Vietnam who was in charge of their biggest real estate company get sentenced to death?
That's right. That was in the news just a week ago or two. Yeah. So there's a crackdown happening everywhere but in North America. So maybe it'll come to North America. I don't know, but I think the pressure is in a democracy. You cannot have a class of people that are so wealthy and so powerful and so influential when everybody else is going to the ballot box voting for the politicians that don't do anything about it, right? So if they're breaking the rules, they're going to have to just make, like China did, they're going to have to make an example of somebody in order to restore confidence in the system.
Do real estate collapses happen from the top down? Great
question. Now, it's not clear. Real estate collapses are quite rare, right? So what the best example we have, the most recent one is in I guess the most recent one is the collapse in China that took China Evergrande down and a bunch of others. That isn't the only company. There's about 5 or 6 of them that have all failed in China. And in that case, I don't think it was from the top down. I think it was the families, and they would gather all their money together to buy this apartment that was going to be built. And they never moved into those apartments. They were basically empty and left empty as an investment vehicle. And so that happened from that level. Certainly in the U.S., subprime mortgages was not from the top down. It was from people that probably never should have gotten a mortgage in the first place. And then Wall Street was investing in these subprime mortgages, which they never should have been investing in, as after somebody bundled them together and somehow magically turned them into prime rather than subprime. So there aren't really enough people in the very high-end category to cause a crash in real estate. But in terms of the numbers, the averages, they were very influential in pushing the average price up because, a $10, $20 million purchase is going to lift the average quite a bit more than a $300,000 purchase. So, but what will happen is a lot of those big properties will probably end up being sold off the market, between a bank who's foreclosed and an investor type buyer. And they won't ever hit the averages on the way down. So you might not see the impact of the high end market coming down, but it'll have in the same way, in the exact opposite way to which those high end purchases, that get a lot of publicity encouraged that person to pay $1 million for a place that probably wasn't worth more than $500,000, on the way down when those high-end places go into foreclosure and get sold at a big loss, it'll throw a real wet blanket over the whole thing. Because think of the lenders, the bankers. On the way up, the bankers are criticized for not making enough loans. On the way down, they're criticized and could get fired for making a bad loan that causes the bank to lose money. So their psychology changes dramatically, and sometimes even the people themselves change. They have, as a bank loans officer, more of a sales type on the way up, and then on the way down, they have more of an accountant type one that is, better at saying no than saying yes. So, it has a big impact, just in terms of setting the tone, I guess, more than anything.
Canadian banks now make up 25% of the TSX index. Will the banks eventually be affected by lower home prices?
It's an incredible thing to talk about the situation with the Canadian banks. So the Canadian banks, their biggest business by far is lending to Canadian households. They in 1980, when I wrote my first book, I looked back at the annual reports. It's hard to find them. I got the annual report of Royal Bank of Canada, and lending to households was just a rounding error for them, and they were not even hardly in that business at all. They were in industry and commerce and worldwide. They had offices worldwide. And then gradually, as they were allowed, with changes in the rules for banks to get more and more into lending for mortgages and household lending and credit cards and all that, they gradually took it over and a lot of the companies that were doing the lending in that sector went under. Like all the trust companies were bought by banks, and most of them failed, and the mortgage companies and all those kind of things. There was lots of problems in the U.S. and Canada. So the banks ended up kind of owning that business. So the idea that they might go through a market crash in the housing market without feeling some major burns and some major defaults and disappointments is just really hard to believe. And yet the stock market is saying to us right now, the banks are trading at the record high multiples. They've never used to trade at much more than 10 or 12 or 13 times earnings. Now they're trading at 15 to 18 times earnings. It's incredible. And the other thing is the dividends are really low right now because the share prices have gone up so much this year. The dividends they're paying are less than 3%. They always used to be like 5%. So the market is saying that the banks are going to skate through this untouched. And my view is completely the opposite. I think the banks are going to really feel it because they are big players in the household lending. And it isn't just mortgages; it's HELOCs and auto loans and credit cards. The banks are involved in all of that. So we'll see. But I would think that it's a very unusual situation where the banks are being treated so well by the stock market. But it's understandable too, because they have not yet shown any really big losses from that sector. And the gains they've made in things like wealth management and stock market trading and capital markets, where they do new issues for companies, have been fantastic. So those divisions, which are smaller than the big lending divisions, have made up quite a bit of the profit growth lately. But you'll start to see the slowdown in the mortgage lending hitting the profits of the banks eventually, and then they'll have to start taking losses, and they don't have the provisions for a large number of losses right now. They haven't increased their provisions for credit losses enough yet to absorb all the losses. So that now the earnings come out next week, so it'll be very interesting. Maybe the next time we talk, we can review if they actually started to recognize some of these potential losses by taking larger provisions for credit losses.
There are very few sales in the housing market in the big centers. Is this a signal we're close to a bottom?
It could be. That the thing is when the buyers and the sellers are so far apart, like the sellers are still thinking, that place that they have is still worth $2 million, and the buyers are saying, it's actually worth less than $1 million. Well, there's no chance of a trade at that point. Like the gap is too wide. Now, there's two ways it can be resolved, at least two ways. One is the bidders, the buyers can move up to the $2 million and say, you know what, sellers, you're right, it's really worth $2 million. Or the sellers could finally admit that last price that was in 2022 is no longer valid and they have to drop their price. Now, most sellers who don't have a big loan and don't have a big problem with at the bank will just pull the house off the market rather than drop the price, because they feel like I'm not going to sell for less than this market that I believe is there, the anchor price we call it. But the lenders will start to take over, and the lenders will say, if you don't sell that house in this example at $1 million, we're going to take it away from you and sell it for you. And And obviously by then there won't be any money left over for the homeowner because the legal fees and everything else will be way too high. So we're at that point where there's a gap between the two, and we'll see which way it's resolved. My bet obviously is that it'll be that sellers will have to come down to the price that the buyers are willing to say. And the buyers are getting more confident that they can hold out longer than the sellers.
Bond yields have increased a lot in the U.S. and Canada. Could this be a sign of a financial crisis approaching?
Well, it certainly happened. I mean, I remember the other thing that's happened recently in the U.S. is we got a new Federal Reserve chairman, it reminds me of '87 when Alan Greenspan came in. Alan Greenspan had one of the longest ever terms, but his original appointment was in early 1987. Shortly after he got elected, or appointed, I should say, he started to raise interest rates, or interest rates started to go up. I'm not sure which. Sometimes the Federal Reserve is following rather than leading. But in any case, the interest rates went up a lot from when he got appointed. I think it was in March to September. I remember looking at bonds in September in 1987 at 13%. And then the October crash came and the Dow Jones went down 22% in one day. So it feels a little bit like, now we're obviously a long way from 13%, but the starting point in 1987 was a lot higher too. So the bond yields have gone up over 5% on some terms in the U.S. There's a point at which you could start seeing the market get shaked out. Like we just talked about bank shares. Their dividends are usually as high as the sort of the long-term 10-year government bond. So there's a real mismatch there. If it goes much higher, people might say, "Well, I'd rather own a government bond," and then you would get a shakeout in the market. I don't know if it's gone up high enough to cause a substantial recession just on its own. But I know the U.S. housing market, which we don't usually talk about, but it is interesting that it's in a slump. Very, very. I don't think prices have come down as much as they have in Canada, but they're in a major slump. But they already had a crash not that long ago. 16 years ago, they had their crash, or maybe 17 years ago now. So you don't usually see a bubble bursting only 17 years later. It takes decades for these bubbles to form. So it'd be very unusual if interest rates going up above 5% caused another housing crash in the U.S. But it certainly could cause that in Canada, and then that would percolate through the whole economy.
The U.S. housing market is in bad shape, and higher mortgage rates will make it worse. What caused the 2008 housing crisis, and could the U.S. be in for a repeat?
Well, I think that the likelihood of another housing crash like they had an amazing crash in 2000. It started actually in 2006 was the peak, and it didn't stop until 2012. And at the bottom, that was around 2010, prices were down on average 38%. Now I see they're starting rewriting history, and they're saying they're only down 20%, but I lived through that. I watched it very closely, and I remember 38%. It depends on what average you take. But there was tremendous. A lot of banks went out of business. A lot of house builders went bankrupt. There was a huge number of households. I forget the number, but there was a huge percentage of houses in the U.S. where the owner was upside down on the mortgage, and they actually have about half the states in the U.S. you can walk away from your mortgage without any recourse. Unlike Canada, where almost everybody is under the penalty of recourse. If they walk away from the house, they have to pay the deficit if the house is sold for less than the value of the mortgage. But in the U.S., they could have walked away with no impact. All the lender can do is seize the home, and that's their recourse. They don't have any recourse to the homeowner, and yet they didn't. About a very small percentage of them actually walked away. So they kept paying their mortgage, even though the better financial decision would have been to walk away and then just go and buy a new house at the cheaper price. So I just don't see it happening again so quickly in the U.S. But who knows? Maybe maybe the shakeout this is just ballpark thinking here, but maybe the shakeout we had in 2009, as bad as it was, did not completely burst the U.S. housing bubble, or it was kind of a worldwide housing bubble, really. And maybe they need to go through another shakeout.
Companies are spending hundreds of billions of dollars per year building AI. Could AI be a house of cards?
I was on a trip, a remote lodge in BC, and there was a guy there from the U.S. who was one of the early founders of one of the companies in Silicon Valley, and he was bought out by a bigger company, and he was involved in silicon chips and making computer chips and all that. So I had a chance to talk to him, and he said it's a house of cards. He said it's a house of cards, and I said, well, why are they building so many of these data centers? Why are they chasing the dream of artificial general intelligence? And he said, well, they're focusing on the wrong thing. He thought they should be looking at AI used for practical purposes, but they're spending an enormous amount of money just on the general intelligence chase. And I've been thinking about it ever since, and I think, well, none of the companies involved are very big in each area. Like Microsoft had really a monopoly in operating systems. Google had a monopoly in search. Amazon has a monopoly in online purchasing, basically. And so their thinking, I guess, is that they need to be number one, because number one will end up capturing, like in the other things that have happened, the bulk of the business in AI. And it may not eventually happen that way, but that's the gamble that they're taking. All of these companies are in a situation where they've gone from having literally hundreds of billions of dollars of cash invested in government treasury bills to the point now where they have to raise money on the market, either by issuing stock or by borrowing money in the bond market. And it's quite amazing. So they've spent all the extra cash they have. Now they're spending way more than the annual cash flow that they get, that they could use to build these data centers. They have to go out. And so on that basis, if there's any kind of a shakeout, or it turns out the story has a flaw in it, and I don't know what the flaw would be. Nobody really, I guess, really knows. But sometimes these things, as I remember in 1999, 2000, it turns out that all the stuff that everybody said was true. It's just that the stock market and the investment in the dot-com era was way too much, and there had to be a shakeout. I mean, most people don't realize that Amazon was one of the leading companies in 1999, 2000. The stock price went down over 90%. It turned out to be a wonderful investment. Even if you bought before the drop, you still had a wonderful investment. But in that shakeout, the price went down over 90%. Microsoft went down over 50%. And the survivors of the dot-com shakeout, they still went through a really tough period. So if that happens in the data center artificial intelligence game, we're going to see something like we haven't seen for quite a long time.
We hear the Strait of Hormuz is closed, then it's open. Oil prices increased this week, indicating it's likely closed. How long until economies start feeling the pain?
Well, it's surprising. There's really only one factor that's stopped this from becoming a crisis until now, and that is the fact that China, which used to import 5 million barrels a day, most of it through the Strait of Hormuz, they used to import 10 million barrels a day, and somehow they've managed to drop it to 5 million. So they basically helped everybody by cutting in half the amount of oil they took off the world markets, and a substantial portion of that came through the Strait of Hormuz. So how long can China? Apparently China had a bunch of oil stored underground that people didn't know they had. They've got floating tanks which they can, by drones and satellites, they can see how full the tanks are. But they also have these salt caverns that nobody knows how big they are. And they've obviously got a lot of crude oil in there. And they're also rapidly switching their transport to electric, away from fuel. So what that has done is it's delayed the crisis that would happen. But if the Strait of Hormuz, is responsible for taking 10-15% of the world's oil off the market for months and months, it's going to have a big impact. And in the U.S., for example, 65% of the crude oil products are used to power light cars and light trucks. And it goes higher if you include heavy trucks, highway trucks, and trains, and all the other airplanes, all the other things. It could be a major shakeout. Now, it is having the impact of causing some countries to switch more rapidly to electric drive than they would have. But you're going to start seeing some problems. Already, it's causing problems for the election coming up in November in the U.S. because the oil price is up over $4 a barrel. The gasoline price is up over $4 a barrel. The diesel price is up by even a larger amount. The diesel price is affecting highway trucks, farmers, a whole bunch of people that depend on construction workers. They use a lot of diesel in all the stuff they do, and it will start to, even if it doesn't get to the point like in the 1970s when people had to drive 55 miles an hour to save gas. But just the price increase enough is going to affect the election in November, and it'll probably affect a lot of other things too.
Widespread voter fraud is being exposed in the U.S. If the Democrats win the midterms, what could it mean for markets and the U.S. economy?
Well, the voter fraud, it's interesting. Election's always rigged if somebody loses, but it's never rigged if somebody wins. So if the right person wins. So obviously November is going to be closely watched for a bunch of reasons. And the unfortunate thing, if the Democrats win, is going to be they're going to have to decide what they're going to do about all of the laws that have been broken by the current administration. They've already impeached Trump twice and lost in the Senate twice. And so will they do it a third time? I just somehow can't imagine them doing it unless they have the votes in the Senate. And in the Senate, you have to have a 2/3 majority to remove a president after the impeachment process is started. And there just aren't enough, even if all the Senate seats that are in play for the November election, only a third of the Senate seats come up each election. So it's very difficult to have a change. It's roughly 50-50 now. It would have to go up to 66-33, 34, and that's physically, I guess, almost impossible. So I think the problem is going to be in the U.S. that the system is going to be there's going to be so much dissension among the Democrats. They've got a progressive wing that's very left wing. They've got the other people who like to sort of be in the moderate in the middle, but they're being heavily criticized for being too accepting of the status quo. I think the U.S. is headed for quite a crisis, and if they happen to have a recession at the same time as all that was happening, then we're going to see a lot of excitement, a lot of extreme outcomes in the U.S. for a little while, and I hope it doesn't affect Canada too much, but it's hard for us not to be affected.
What's the latest on Alberta independence?
Well, the question is going to come up in October on a referendum ballot, and there's 9 questions that are yes or no questions, and then there's a 10th question. And the 10th question is option 1 and option 2. Option 1 is remain a province in Canada, and option 2 is something. Now, this isn't the exact wording. I don't have it in front of me, but it's something like, should we start the process to have a look at how we might have a referendum to separate from Canada? And so it isn't like, do you want to separate from Canada? It's like, do you want to start the process to separate from Canada? And so they're asking people to vote 10 times. And I don't know if it's 10 different ballots or one ballot 10 times. It's apparently very, very complex from an administration point of view, because they don't even know how they're going to count all those votes, because there's going to be too many ballots to count. They have to hire a bunch of people. And of course, there will be questions about the process as to whether it was fair or not. So there's a real split. It still looks like there's only about 20% of the people in Alberta that are really seriously interested in separating from Canada, which leaves 80% who would rather stay with Canada. But, it's possible that some people might take the view, and I remember hearing this in the 70s and the 80s about Quebec, and say, well, you don't actually go for independence or separation because you want to do that. You just go and vote for that in order to get a bit better deal from Ottawa. So that argument might be made in Alberta, and some people might go for that argument. So it's we'll see in October, but it's already it's late August, so it's not that far away. It's less than 60 days away, I guess. So it's going to be heating up quite a bit, and there are a small minority, but a very vocal and perhaps powerful minority that would like to see Alberta join the U.S. And that is, one of the things that a vote for independence from Canada might lead to. So there's a lot at stake. There's going to be a lot of people getting quite excited about it in the next 60 days or so.
Automakers are bringing out more and more new models of EVs, including Porsche's Cayenne EV and Macan EV. Would you consider switching from Tesla products?
Well, I would like to look at other EVs beyond Tesla, because Tesla, the model I have is the Model S, and I really like it. But it's over 5 years old now, and the technology has moved ahead so quickly, especially in China. That I would like to look at some of these new offerings, but we're not allowed to look at the Chinese. So apparently, there's going to be something like 49,000 cars entering Canada from China. I haven't seen one yet, so I don't know when that's going to happen. But I'd love to see new models from some of the other car manufacturers. I saw one for Mercedes, for example. They're talking now. It's actually not out yet. You can't order it yet, but late this year, you'll be able to order the new Mercedes EV. But the price is really high, and the specs do not match the car I currently own, which is, as I mentioned, 5 years old. So it's hard to make the switch to a very expensive car that doesn't measure up. So now Ford apparently has been working on a new EV for they gave up on the F-150, and I don't know if they've given up on the Mustang Mach-E or not, but they have been working on a new model that could be very interesting. When I go to the chargers at Tesla now, all the other makes can use it. And I was just there in this latest trip a couple of days ago, and I saw a Korean car and a Japanese car that were both using the Tesla charger. So, it's coming. But I think Tesla still. Now, I should mention that the model that I have, the Tesla's decided to stop making. So now they're only making the Model 3 and the Model Y, or the Model E and the Model Y. And they'd like to call it E, but they're not allowed to call it E. So Model 3 and Model Y. So I'd rather have a bigger sedan that's faster like mine, which is the Model S, but they just officially stopped making it earlier this year. So we'll see. Maybe Tesla will come out with a new model that is exciting enough to get me a switch. But for now, I think I'll just keep the one I got. It's a great car.
Hilliard, where can our listeners follow you and buy your book?
So they can buy the book, as I mentioned, any of the top bookstores or online from Amazon and other sources. And they can track me on X, formerly Twitter, and also they can sign up for weekly weekend note, we call it, that comes out every week, and you get it into your email. There's no charge for it yet. And also on X, we put out that chart on the Canadian housing market about the middle of the month. As soon as the CREA releases the data, we make up the chart and put it out. So probably X is one of the best ways to find me. It's HMACBE, and then you can find the website through that.
Hilliard, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Great to be on the show.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth. You can find him on X at HMACBE. Coming up, Tanya Gaw, next on This Week in Money. This Week in Money is archived on YouTube at Talk Digital Network. Welcome back. My guest is Tanya Gaw, founder of Action for Canada, online at action4canada.com. Tanya, welcome to This Week in Money.
Well, I'm so glad to be here, Jim. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Can you tell us a bit about Action for Canada?
Well, we're a national organization. We've got chapters in almost every single province, and we're very focused on educating Canadians, helping them to know what their rights are so that they can defend those. We provide them resources in order to do that. We also lobby government at all levels of government, providing them information as well on what their duties and responsibilities are, as well as their limitations. And so we've had some real great success stories. I think the most recent one would be Alberta, where we gave the education minister a couple of years ago a 3-inch binder showing the harms of SOGI, the tangible harms to children, served them a notice of liability, provided them information on those pornographic and sexually explicit books back in November of 2024. And several months later, they said, give us a little bit of time to investigate this. Several months later, we were very grateful to see Minister Nicolaides and Daniel Smith reporting on the sexually explicit pornographic books and actually calling them out and removing them. And then this year, they passed Bill 25 that as of September, they're going to remove all political and ideological agendas from the classroom. So that's just one example of some of the success that we're having. There's many more, but I'm just really pleased about the work and our wonderful chapters and volunteers across the country.
You recently had a banking adventure in British Columbia. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. As I was going through the process to banking managers, their compliance department, their fraud department, I was asking, are we living in communist China or is this Canada? And so what had happened is my 85-year-old mom, she'll actually be 86 in November, but she's, very responsible with her banking. She always has been. And she was part of a scam last year, and it was 750,000 Canadians. Private financial information was taken on the dark web by hackers. And if for those of your listeners who don't know what CIRO is, it's the Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization, and they're responsible for keeping our private financial information safe and secure. And so August 11th, of last year, there had been this major hack. Cybersecurity, they called it an incident, and I don't think obtaining 750,000 Canadians' most sensitive personal and financial information is an incident. This is outrageous. And so they didn't bother to inform people until the end of January, where my mom received a letter in the mail saying that she was part of this hack. They apologized for it and said that they'd worked with law enforcement and hired cybersecurity experts. And I was like, why are you hiring cybersecurity experts after the fact? Why don't we have the best security possible on our financial information? So it really was very outrageous. And so my mom, has risks, and when you're elderly, you have to take some of that money out, and it goes in your bank account. And then from there, the stolen information that they had in this hack was social insurance number, dates of birth, government issued ID numbers, annual incomes, investment account numbers. So my mom had no idea what actual information did these people take as far as the account number was concerned. And so she wanted to do something else with that money. She didn't want it tracked, and so she requested a lump sum of cash. And they said, no, we can't do that, but you can take X amount of dollars out a week. And so she's like, okay, fine. So I explained it to her when she came home and told her what the reasons was. And they gave her a hard time. And, we've got to understand that there is this huge increase in fraud and people especially going after the elderly. So we appreciate banks asking questions. Is there someone outside waiting for you to hand them this cash? Are you buying gift cards for anyone? Are you being defrauded? Did you get a phone call? But explain to people why that's happening. Nobody took the time to explain to my mom why it was they were asking these questions. So she was quite annoyed with them and said, that's none of your business. Well, why aren't you taking a money transfer? That's none of your business. I just want my cash. And she would say things like, you never, ask me questions when the money was deposited, and I don't expect these questions when I'm taking my money out. I've answered your reasonable questions. Anyway, so we got, through that a couple of weeks, she took withdrawals out. Then she went back to the bank, and the banks are so unorganized. Like, they should have had a note on my mom's file, because now you get a new teller who's not well trained, asking me my questions. She's like, look, there's nobody that's defrauding me. I don't have a gun to my head. I just want the cash. So the bank manager gets involved for whatever reason, and without my mom's knowledge, he escalated it to the fraud department as if it was suspicious transactions. And I was like, there's nothing suspicious about it. I'd already met with one of the bank managers as well the week before to explain to them about Zero and why my mom's concerned about having a line as to where she's putting her cash next. And so this is the same. So then I started hearing stories from other people. And so this went on for 3 weeks, this battle against the banks. And because they decided that next day when we went in for an appointment to freeze my mom's bank accounts. And they walked us out of the bank and told us to get out. Because I started recording the incident here that was going on, I wanted evidence. I said, look, you're way overstepping. My mom has answered your questions. And I said, TD Bank is the money laundering capital of banks. Your U.S. division had to pay $3 billion in fines because of it. The Canadian president stepped down because it happened on his watch. I said, she's not laundering money. She's not part of a drug cartel. She isn't a terrorist. There's no terrorist funding. I said, so on what grounds are you doing this? And nobody ever in the 3 weeks ever answered the question. And so it looked targeted after a period of time, but I guess they saw that I was writing very strongly worded letters. I understood what our rights were, and so I documented all of that, and it was a 911, a wake-up call for Canadians, warning about the accounts blocked. I documented everything, but with Action for Canada, we never just say, oh, this is a problem and scare the bejeebers out of everybody. We want to have a solution. And so I've provided that solution, and we want people to be educated so they know what their rights are. So I quote Canada's Bank Act and the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, as they've made it clear that everybody has a right to a bank account unless there is fraud going on, provable fraud. I quoted PPIDA, which is Canada's federal private sector privacy law, and that as they're investigating as well, it has to be reasonable. Reasonable is the key word when there is consideration of an appropriate outcome and what is going on. You must have evidence, and there's zero evidence. And then I also quoted FinTrack, which is the anti-money laundering framework. And again, it says you need evidence. It needs to be reasonable. And not once in the 3 weeks, still to this date, because I've demanded a letter, now that our accounts have been released as of last week, Wednesday, I've demanded a letter by what authority they did this. And I says, it's fine to hide behind, oh, we're protecting the elderly by fraud. But I said, she's a human being who was dehumanized, I want to say, who wasn't treated with dignity and respect, 85 years old. And the one bank manager, I must say, in the Clayton branch, he was amazing. He went to bat for us. He said, look, I'm right here with these customers. They're long-standing good customers. And the staff were very aware of the Freedom Convoy, that the trust in the banking system had deteriorated at that point. Action for Canada has been training people for years and having special guests on about considering getting the money out of RIFs and RSPs because everything could, collapse, and to get it into precious metals, which has, throughout history has always been reliable. And so people have been making transfers from their savings, and so the banks are being hit really, really hard. Nobody trusts the CBDCs, the digital ID that's coming. We want it to stop. And, of course, they were fast-tracking this agenda, and now we're interfering with that. And I says, you guys have no idea, what you're doing right now. I said, this is a matter of public interest, and I'm going to go public with this. I have a duty to do that. And so in the report that I have created, I also have the solution in the end, that cash is king, why it is that I navigated through this extremely well. Yes, it was extremely upsetting and frustrating not to have access to our accounts, not to know what the final outcome was, but I had cash prepared at home. I could still go and pay my bills. I could go to, TELUS if I needed to, or wherever, in Rogers, wherever I needed to pay a bill. And so my high recommendation is to people is protect cash. Stop putting convenience over control. Knock it off. Start using cash. Reconsider where you keep your wealth. Keep paper bills. All of these hydro and everybody wants to go paperless. Demand that you receive your bills. Even provide them this report. Provide them the Zero report saying our information is not safe online. And if I put automatic payments, if I have no idea what my bills are, how are you going to pay those bills? You have no account information. You don't have your account number to these companies, which, they could turn off your electricity. Do you want that happening? And then, so keep paper bills and statements, protect your privacy. When you withdraw money, I'd recommend going to bank machines, because I found out afterwards you can increase whatever your amount is that you could take out daily. And you could go there and you don't have to deal with a teller. Nobody's asking you what your business is. So know your rights, be prepared, and seriously, if you don't want to lose this, reduce your digital dependence. So that's just a snapshot, of what I've been through and what I've learned through this season.
After posting your article detailing your banking adventure, did you get any response from your readership?
Absolutely. Yeah, a number of people have reached out to us with different stories, whether it was TD Bank, BMO, RBC, all the big five are doing the same thing. Interestingly, I haven't seen any complaint come in about the, what do you call it, not the big five banks, the credit unions. And, I was saying to somebody this morning, it sure be great if the credit unions realize what's going on. Because they could be the superstars in this and refusing to go along with the digital banking system and actually go back to a customer service base. And, a lot of the banks, you go into TD Bank and they don't even have a business person anymore that knows your name or your face. And do you remember on that Cheers show, that little sitcom? And, it's part of, I think the theme was that, everybody knows your name. And try going to a bank where these people actually know you. At this particular branch, zero. At the other branch in Clayton, this was the Fleetwood branch with Mr. Charn Sangha, who created all of this problem and who has refused to provide us, the reasons for this. The other thing I want to, just as it goes in my mind as well, so I don't forget, it wasn't only my mom's accounts that were shut down. It ended up being mine as well, because my mom and I were joint on each other's accounts. And we did that 20 years ago or so, that if either of us had become ill and somebody needed to take care of our bills, one of us would have access to the other's account. And so if you have an account situation with somebody else like that where you're joint, reconsider that. I still think we should have joint accounts, but maybe keep a minimal amount in that account and then have separate accounts where you have, additional funds. Also have multiple banks where you have funds. And that if this, happens, that you could maybe, set up the process and continue banking through another institution. So yeah, we've definitely heard from other people who are experiencing the same thing. And I would say to the managers and stuff, I said, you guys are just shooting yourself in the foot here. And they said, the one lady had brought it up to me. She goes, yeah, I know, we've talked about this at the management level. We know how people are feeling across Canada. And I said, then why are you doing this? And the compliance departments were saying that they were overwhelmed with calls. And I said, why do you think that is? It's because you're overstepping. You're taking long-standing customers and you're treating them like garbage. They've got banking advocates, within the bank, a manager, somebody who can speak on their behalf. And they're all hiding behind this fraud. And the other thing I want to bring up, so I don't forget, is that I deal with a couple of silver, gold, bullion dealers and who will help you move your RSPs or risk to precious metals. We deal with Steve Merrill. It's all on our website, and I provide it in this report in case somebody wants, across Canada, they'll deal with somebody honest to deal with. And we've been dealing with Steve for years, but they're all telling me as well that as they deal with customers, say somebody's going to do a $30,000 transfer and they want to purchase silver, and the banks are either stalling them, refusing to transfer the money, they're insisting on knowing what they're doing with that cash. I mean, it's really getting out of control, and they're all saying, you know, that they're concerned about people being defrauded. It's like, well, you know, you got to have some common sense. It's got to be reasonable.
Do banks actually seem to care about their customers?
I think that, you know, it depends on the person running the branch. Mr. Taylor definitely cares about the customers. And, you know, he shows that. And I said to everyone I dealt with in departments higher up, I said, Mr. Taylor's branch needs to be the model for TD Bank. I says his staff are well trained, they're well informed, they treat the customers with respect, they explain the process to them. There is access to the bank manager when this was taking place. See, I'm not going to throw everybody, you know, under the bus on this, but the problem is higher up. And the problem as well is what we got to take a look at is, as I was researching this the other day, I'm like, who's the head of this fraud, this online, the banking, the telephone fraud? And it's actually the South Asians. They came up as number one, leading the pack. And I thought, I wonder if there's any connection there with the fact that all of our banking information, all of our private information, telephone numbers and addresses and things like this has been handed over to call centers in India. I know, you know, hackers can get our call sheets and things online, but we're handing them, the banks and the government are handing our information over to foreigners who are well known for high levels of corruption and fraud. So I'd like to learn more about that, because I don't think it's a coincidence that these individuals are the ones handling our credit card information, answering calls about our banking, and they happen to be the ones calling the elderly people, and you know, that this is escalated. Keep our business in Canada, protect our financial information, start cutting this off, reel it back in, stop with the digital ID nonsense. It is nothing. They're trying to market this on keeping our information safe, and the serial case of 750,000 Canadians whose information was taken is a good sign that they can't commit to this, and it's all a fraud. They're committing fraud, and they're deceiving people en masse to try to control everything we're doing. And your listeners really need to hear this very clearly. If they shut down your bank accounts and all of your banking is online, you have no way of accessing anything. And, you know, we talk about the fact that you won't be able to buy groceries unless you have, some call it a mark. In Sweden, they were having chip parties where these dummies were having somebody put a chip under their right hand as if they were being real progressive. And it's like, seriously? Are you willing to go forward and take the jab, the next one that's coming, the death shot? Are you willing to give that up so you can buy groceries? I mean, people really got it. We have consumer power. We have buying power, and we better start using that, and we better take control, because we are the majority, and we really do have the power to turn this around if we all work together and are committed.
Are offshore call centers a security concern?
I would say 100%. You know, they'll try to tell us different, but what we're experiencing is the evidence to me is quite compelling that we should have a right to a full investigation, and that they should be very transparent about what they receive. And just the fact that the reports that I am finding are saying that this community of people are number one in committing the fraud. So let's put 1 + 1 together, and let's do an investigation. But also, you know, I got to be honest, I don't like getting on the phone with somebody where I can't understand what they're telling me in the process. I want to speak to a Canadian about my banking information, about my private information. And so there's multiple reasons why this needs to turn around. We need to be bold, and we need to voice our complaints.
Do the same people or entities likely control all the banks in Canada?
Well, I think this has become a global takeover. I think you have the IMF, the International Monetary System, the World Bank. I think I call them the banksters, and they're all behind this system. We're experiencing the greatest heist in the history of the world, and these wealth transfers are taking place. And we know that the hundreds of billions of dollars that Trudeau, for instance, in his reign of terror, provided to overseas to make life better for Africans or Indians or whoever was a bunch of hogwash. None of those people are experiencing a better way of life. Where is this money going? To the United Nations. I think we need to designate the United Nations as a terrorist organization who are infiltrating our government and our banking systems and trying to control that. This is a wealth transfer, and we need to give our head a shake if we think that our top 5 banks are operating. They've shown the evidence of it on our behalf. They've become an operating arm of our tyrannical, treasonous government. So no, I have no confidence in the direction that those who are heading up the banks, where their marching orders are coming from. It's a system we can no longer trust.
Do you think there's a war on cash in Canada?
And that's 100%, yes. And it will become extinct if we don't continue to use it. Once the CBDCs and the digital systems are in place, as I've mentioned, good luck in reversing it. We have a window of opportunity right now to stop it, and people need to take this extremely serious. This is a major battle, and they know it. They know it.
When you trust a bank to hold your money, are you actually giving up control of your money?
Yeah. In this day and age, yes, you are. And our situation that we went through is evidence of that. Because if I only had my cash in the bank and I hadn't taken the steps, because like I said, for many, many years, we've been educating people on this to have cash at home in case there was an emergency. If I hadn't had cash at home, I wouldn't have been able to function. I would have been in an extremely bad place. And what if they, in the end, hadn't turned it around? You see, for a person like myself, I'm not a lawyer, but I know how to research, and I know my rights. And if I don't know my rights, I'm going to find out what are my rights. And so I am servicing Canadians by consistently, in the last 11 years, providing you that information. And we do this for free. All of our resources are for free. And I'd so appreciate it, if your listeners would support Action for Canada. If this is benefiting you, if it's benefited you to invest in silver and you've had a massive increase in, your funds, think about us. We're on the front line of legal actions. I have several going right now. We've got our COVID case coming up. We'll be in court September 24th in Vancouver. That's still moving forward. I have a drag queen, who is suing me for defamation. We go for a decision on September 1st in Kelowna. So there's a lot that we're doing. And we're really, this tremendous service to Canadians. So I hope they consider that. But more than anything, the reason why all of this information is free, because the more we educate Canadians, they're going to think about who they're voting at the poll. They need to stop voting party lines, and they need to be tenacious, and they need to help good people get elected at all levels of government. This isn't a one-issue attack. And so we need to be strategic in the way that we're coming against this. How does the candidate that you're going to vote for in, I think it's 4 provincials, are having an election this fall? How are you going to vote? Are you involved? Do you know where they stand on this issue of CBDCs and digital ID systems, on AI factories? Who are you voting for? This is critical. If we want our banking system set free, we need a prime minister who is going to be fighting for Canadians and making sure all of this garbage is removed, and that we remove ourselves from any control under the United Nations. These are unelected bodies who have zero say in what Canadians are doing. We don't have to comply to anything that they're saying, and we need a prime minister who understands that. In
2009, then Finance Minister Jim Flaherty made bank bail-ins in Canada legal but said they would not be used, then why make them legal? Why are bank bail-ins a concern, and what can we do about it if we are concerned?
Well, again, this is all the same thing. This is why I'm saying get your cash out of the bank, find a way to invest in it, and that it's off the books. And the reason is a bank bail-in, a bank bailout is where the government will come and bail out a bank if it's having problems. And yes, they're using tax dollars, but a bank bail-in goes into your account. It goes into your safety deposit box. So if you have a safety deposit box and you have private information in there, what would you do if you don't have access? And so people need to be understanding this. They actually will come clean out our accounts in order to save this corrupt banking system. And right now the banks are really struggling because they know a massive amount, millions and millions of dollars are being removed from the banking system because of how they are managing and the threat to people that if we don't comply with the government, the bank is going to be the arm that closes down our access to it. So yeah, 100%. The bank bail-in is a threat. They've had it in our budget, very deep into the Liberal budgets. Every year that they put it in, they have a bank bail-in clause. And so, of course, the public aren't well educated. And again, this is why we're having this conversation in a hope that it will come to the attention of many people. And I really, again, encourage your listeners to share, this information. If you can't do anything else, you can help educate others. And so don't just listen to this program and say, wow, I'm blown away, I've learned a lot. Share it and then take action as well.
In theory, by freezing credit or not lending, could banks bring down the economy and the real estate market?
Oh, yeah, and I think they're working towards that already. We think about Klaus Schwab, who said, you'll own nothing and be happy, which is a load of horse bunk, of course. There's not an inch of truth to that. So it's a multi-level attack against Canadians, this garbage about white colonialism and that we own, the Indians. I'm never going to call them First Nations. They weren't first. They didn't build a nation. They're not indigenous to the land. They immigrated here at some point along with the rest of us. According to the Indian Act, they're called Indians. So I'm going to be very precise on that. So we're handing over all of this money to them. And of course, this is all part of the fraud and the globalists, and the Chinese are behind this because they want our minerals and resources. And so when you hear about these chiefs and these bands being given land, in the Indian Act, they've never owned land. They don't own the reserves. They are on that property, but the federal government owns it. And so that's the same thing that's going on right now. So it's the federal government doing these land grabs. So that's one of them. That's one way they're stealing people's property. And we have a God-given right to our property and to protect that. That's another story. But the other way that they're doing that is something called credit freezing. So you now have people, farmers, who are wanting to sell, maybe they have 30 acres or 80 acres, and nobody can afford the multi-million dollars it's going to take. And the banks are refusing to give people who are interested the mortgages for them. They are now refusing to renew mortgages or approve them. And so, yes, this is a different area of the attack that people should be aware of. And again, that goes back to who are you voting for? Where do they stand on these issues? And are they going to turn this around and get control of the banking system in Canada? So yeah, it's a real threat.
Are there solutions where the banks work for their customers and make the economy stronger?
Well, that goes back to 100%. We are the majority and we have consumer power and we must use it. And we must let the banks know. And by doing that, you go in there, you get your investments out, you transfer them. There's Questrade that's available to transfer your RIFs and RSPs into precious metals. You can store them. You can still keep them under a RIF or RSP, but they'll be in a Brinks. And, there's other areas to store them in. And so that's the way to hurt the banks. I think there needs to be a bank run right now. And people need to only have enough in the banks that they can pay their bills with. You always should have some emergency money within the banks if you need your credit card to pay for something. And we need to show the banks that we're boss. And you know what? That they were entrusted as a business partner in this. to manage to store our money. We have a contract with them. And I would say that when I was at the bank to the bank manager on the first day this was happening, because he's behind it. And I said, why did you do this? Why did you report my mom to the fraud department? She made it very clear she wasn't being defrauded. And he had no answers for me. I said, on what basis? So you need to demand these kind of answers. And the banks have parameters under the Bank Act that they must operate under. And we need to hold them to account on that. And so we have this power. We've got to use it. And I'm not giving anybody, just to be clear, I'm not giving anybody a financial advice here. I'm giving you options. Because when this whole banking system fails, and now what you thought you had as risks and RSPs disappear, the only thing that you can count on and throughout, and I'm saying that, if you look back in, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and currently, when you own silver, what you could do with a bar of silver, say you could purchase a car with a bar of silver, you could purchase a chariot back in X day and a suit and a robe, and you do those comparisons. Silver and gold have always stood the test of time. And that's what I've learned over the years. And so what happens if and when this collapse comes? And so you need to be as debt-free as possible. They're trying to drive you into debt so that you're reliant on the government. They want you in victimhood. What can you do? And Canadians, unfortunately, have learned to rely on credit. So what could you stop? Do you have Netflix? Stop paying for Netflix. Take out the things that are what you consider luxuries in your life. Well, I don't have this, and let's old school it for a while. And let's cut out all of the unnecessary expenses. Go back to family times. Go back to game night. There's so many different things that we could be doing as a society to take away the control and the comforts that some people just don't want to let go of.
Tanya, where can our listeners follow Action for Canada and possibly get involved?
Oh, I love that question, Jim. So go to Action for Canada. That's action with the number 4canada.com, and go join in our tab. Main menu is the join button. And when you're on that page as well, it also shows that you can join a chapter. We're pretty much in every single province. And then we also have the option to have a chapter online, where for people across Canada where a chapter isn't near them, our chapter national chapter leader coordinator Kim McBride is meeting with those people, and so she's providing the resources. Okay, so you're very concerned about the books in your school. Well, man, we have great campaigns against that. We've got a campaign coming out this every September. On the first week, it's like, men, dads, bring your kids to school. Serve the teachers and the principals a notice of liability. We don't want to see those flags. We don't want to hear about SOGI in the classroom. Put the standard down right there. Then we have a flyer on SOGI called Win Sex In Ontario, and by different names, we've got a flyer for each province. And you know what? Stand outside schools, get a campaign together with other parents, and warn other parents about them, educate them. We've got one on 15-minute cities. We've taken now the biggest 15-minute city in Canada in Winnipeg a couple of years ago. We're being vigilant about that. So we've got fantastic campaigns on mass immigration and things like this. So whatever your interest is, Action for Canada covers these, and just reach out to a local chapter, get involved, and in whatever way that you possibly can. And so we look forward to meeting you and partnering with you. And we're having great success with a small Gideon's Army, and we want that just to really explode into every single community. So check it out, and yeah, that would be wonderful.
Tanya, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Thanks, Jim. That's an honor to be here talking with you on this subject.
My guest has been Tanya Gaw, founder of Action for Canada. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark, Hilliard MacBeth, and Tanya Gaw. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for the show or for our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money. Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. This Week in Money is a production of House Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer, Tom Allen.